I'm Jason Wilson. Martin said I'm currently living in Lucerne. I might sound like I'm not from here. I'm not. Currently work as a consultant here with a... Well, I haven't done it yet.
Oh, sorry. It looked like you were. Sorry. Shut up.
Just violently? No.
Apologies.
I currently am a front-end consultant. I work for a company here that works for Swisscom. We just had a release week, so if I sound stressed, it's getting better now. And if something on the Swisscom site doesn't work, it wasn't me. So now, clicker test. There we go. All right. I am on Twitter. Surprise. This is going to be a talk on kind of my perspective on UX topics, coming from the perspective of someone who was a developer, burnt out, left development, went and did something else entirely, and then came back to development with a bunch of lessons from experiencing the world in a way that I guess most people don't get to. So what I'm hoping is that these are going to be useful for everyone. If they're not, I get to tell C stories for 15 minutes, so it works out. Feel free to follow me, ask any questions. Fair warning, I have two nationalities. It's the US and the UK. They're currently competing to see who can outdo each other for being terrible. I also have a policy degree, so there's a lot of politics in my Twitter, but I try to talk about development stuff too. Also an excuse to use photos. I know I look big now. I'm actually the guy on the left. So yeah, this is a fun little journey with things like storms and mechanical failures and how I can relate that to what I do now and what we all do on the web. Small disclaimer, I am not a UX expert. I am primarily a front-end developer. I'm a bit of a unicorn in the sense that I can actually back that up, just not very deep. In combination with my kids, I've started taking to the whole narwhal thing because it's like sea unicorn, and they have a YouTube video that runs for 24 hours. It's just a song about it, so it's in my head now. So that all out of the way, I have 6 shortish lessons. Each one's a C story, and then each one has some UX or development tie-ins. So starting off, lesson 1 is emergency stops, or maybe that was a mistake. So I actually forget which ship it was on. There's 2 ships. So this is either a ship that's powered by 2 very large diesel engines, like the kinds that drive the trains here, or 5 generators that are equal size. In either case, on the control panel are a number of buttons for all kinds of different functions that we had to do while we were navigating the ship to take control of the engines from the engineers, change the engine states, put them in standby, what have you. I wish I could have found the photo, but this is pretty much close to reality. The emergency stop button for the generator was right next to the standby button for the generator. For those of you not familiar with it, the function of an emergency stop on a generator or an engine on a ship is to, no matter how fast it's going, stop it immediately. Which the engineers assured us if we were going anywhere over slow speed would just completely shred the engine. And these 2 switches are kind of about 2 inches apart. And we had 2 engines, so you had double the opportunity to kind of do it. So it's like a cluster of 10 buttons, 9 of which you have to use and 1 of which you'd better never touch. So that's kind of getting into the first lesson, and I'm going to detour here into the second one because this first one gets a little bit more interesting. So the second one is light police. So being a sailor, navigating, we've got a lot of fancy instruments to help us in electronics, but you primarily have to look out the window to make sure that what all the information you're getting fed to you lines up with the reality of what you're seeing. So at nighttime, your night vision is hugely important. which starts out at the beginning of your watch as, okay, we'll turn off the overhead lights and make sure the rest of the outside lights on the ship are turned off. And then gradually, as your eyes adjust, it turns into this hunt with electrical tape. Where is that light coming from? And it's all the smallest little LED from some radio, some indicator light, will reflect in the glass in front of you, and you won't be able to see anything out. And you'll spend 5-10 minutes tracking down where is this like little green flash of light coming from every 5 minutes. We would eventually, like in the morning, it just looked like a crime scene with tape everywhere. Like there's black tape on anything. And what was really interesting is, these are very specialized electronics. You don't usually put like a 10-foot radar dish on like a bus. It usually goes on a ship. So it was really interesting that all these electronic companies are still putting these little indicator LEDs. Like they're keeping LED companies in business with all these little lights. It was always really annoying, like why there was a button that I could press, I could dim the lights down almost far enough. I couldn't turn them off. So we had to go through, and we were essentially every single night, because the guys on the day shift wanted to see those indicator lights. People on the night shift didn't want to see the lights. So every night we're going through and we're taping over the same 500 lights, and your eyes adjust a little more, and it's like someone's got a flashlight on the shore 2 miles away. You're like, what is that light? So make sure my laptop doesn't fall asleep here. Tying that back into what we do. We have a lot of things that we do that are distractions, whether it's, hey, take our survey, hey, look, we can make this button move, things like that. And in some cases, like, they're neat. They're little, they're happy visual elements. They attract attention. People like them. They're cute. In some cases, though, your users are on a mission. They're trying to accomplish something. They're trying to do something for, they're trying to log into my bank account for the 50th time. Have to do it every day or something like that. Get out of the way. Cut the distractions. Try to streamline. And just be wary that your users are trying to accomplish something. Their time's valuable, and they don't want to spend a whole bunch of time taking care of your things or things that you've forgotten before they do things that you do. So, see, some of these might be a stretch, but with the light thing in mind, going back to the emergency stops. So, like I said, I wish I had the photo. It's a pretty decent representation, except usually during my watch, it looked more like that. So, again, if I press one button, I gently tell the generator, I don't want to use you anymore, I'm going to use your friend. If I press the other button, the chief mechanical engineer wakes up and I'm probably swimming back home. So, guard destructive actions. I asked he was probably the wrong engineer to ask on the ship. I learned that later on, but I asked, like, they make flip-up covers for switches, Anyone that's ever seen Top Gun knows, like, you can't even shoot at somebody without flipping the switch first and then flipping another switch. Sorry. Why don't we just have these covers? You get them at Home Depot, the home store, and like just put it over there. Safeguard destructive actions. With UX in mind and thinking about web applications and software that we build, putting an actual blocker in front, like putting a cover over the switch, probably isn't a good idea because now you're just in the way. But consider things when you're building systems that deal with data or destructive actions. Consider soft deletes, delayed actions, confirmations, whatever might be appropriate for your audience. Also, I have to thank a coworker for reminding me of this story. Who remembers a couple years back the nuclear missile warning in Hawaii? Yeah. So I worked for the government. I can imagine what that interface looked like. Don't put the option for send a test right above the option for scare the crap out of everybody. And if you're gonna do it, at least make sure you kill the scroll wheel on your mouse so that you can't just, click test, verify that you click test, move the mouse 2 inches, and then suddenly you're sending out the message to the world. Just kind of be mindful, like if you're about to allow your users to do something severe, be mindful of the fact that it might be an accident, especially if you've put your save button, your delete button right next to each other, things like that. Try to avoid things like that. So, next one, Davit Falls. So this is my first ship. We were hydrographic survey ship, which meant every single day we had 4 of these boats that are, they're 30 feet long, they're about 12 metric tons. And they lived in those little C-shaped arms up high on the ship. So every single day we were picking these boats up from the deck, putting them in the water with people on board. They'd go away, do their work, come back, we pick them back up, pull them back on the deck. Some days it was, actually, this photo looks really nice, but actually the entire reason that you've got all 3 boats behind the ship like this is because it was really choppy out and the ship kind of knocks the waves down, so we were hanging out behind the ship where it was nice and comfortable. When you get alongside, all of a sudden you're kind of pitching up and down. And when you're new, my first few times out on those boats, you're sitting on the front of it where you're really going up and down, and you're waiting to receive a hook from the ship that you can hook into the boat. This is actually after the change of the equipment. So Davit Falls, for those of you that don't know, are basically the cable. The cable and whatever attachment assembly comes down from the davit. The davit is the special crane that picks a boat up. When our old set of davits were initially built, they were one of 2 sets in the world, and they were highly technically and computer sophisticated, which, if you know computers and saltwater and new things that have only been made twice, they weren't amazing. But probably the most perplexing part of the design, and at first I didn't think anything of it, I was just like, yeah, it's a dangerous job and this is just what we do. They were built with the hook assembly on the end of the cable. So the boat had a steel eye that you would hook into, and the hook was mounted on the cable, so they would lower the hook down to you. To keep the right amount of tension, this is like a big steel hook. The thing was actually like, the body of it was that big, had a big steel wheel inside of it to hold the cable, and then a hook like that big underneath it. Probably weighed a good at least 100 pounds, probably closer to 200 pounds. And as you're bobbing up and down, they would lower this down to you, and you're supposed to grab hold of it and keep it in the right position until you can push it in and it clicks into the hook, and then they lift you out. Problem here is we had an issue that we didn't kind of realize at first. Like, the electronics would flake out on us a lot, and we kept complaining about that. What that issue eventually turned into is one day the brakes decided that, we'll just give out. These were supposed to be constant tension, so once they were hooked in, they were supposed to actually sense that the boat was going up and down, and they would adjust. What they did in this case was they just dropped. And it dropped a 200-pound hook, 20 feet, hit the deck of this aluminum boat about 6 inches away from someone half my size that was waiting to catch it. All on camera. We just happened to be filming that day for some publicity stuff, so not the best time for that to happen. The replacement system, which is what you can actually see kind of in here, let me get that mouse out of the way, trying to keep it awake, made a whole lot more sense. It was the little metal ring, which only had to be like this big, was on the end of the hook, or on the end of the cable, and then the hook was on the boat. So instead of like a 200-pound hook coming down to us, we had a 5-pound ring. 5-pound ring falls 30 feet. Maybe it hits you in the hard hat and it hurts a little bit, but it's not going to kill anybody. So this was kind of the thought behind this, tying this back into UX, because ideally I'm supposed to be teaching you something with sea stories, not just telling sea stories. there are things that you're going to offer for users that are risky in the confines of what they're doing. Deleting information, maybe you work in a banking system. Do you really want to delete your last year worth of statements? Something like that. Look at those risks. Sometimes they have to be taken. This is a job that they've offered to civilian companies because the US likes getting rid of government agencies. The civilians don't want to do it because it's risky. You're flinging tons of steel and boat around through the air on a daily basis. But it's also work that needs to get done. So, when you have these systems, your user flows, your user interfaces, any of the tasks that you build for your users to do, minimize any of the risk where you can. Make the least amount of effort to accomplish it while still kind of being a safe task. Obviously, well, actually, not obviously, maybe the way the web's going on right now, maybe you're working on systems that control drones through the web for construction sites or something. You actually do have a few 100 pounds depending on your UI, not flaking out. Again, don't put the emergency stop next to the other thing. But kind of be mindful. I'm sure everyone has a user interface that they've had to use. Mine's usually been the banks, where you click on one link and suddenly you're so far away from what you were trying to do that the only thing that you can do is go back to Google, search for your site again, and start over. It's a terrible experience. Don't do it. So, next, steering failure. Until I worked on government ships, I think we have more failures than others, but it's just kind of, I'm hoping my coworkers don't ever watch this video. Subtitle, that didn't work, what next? So, interesting thing about this photo, I chose it because it shows the steering system I wanted to talk about, but this is actually taken just after a power failure, so it's kind of a related image in a way. So this story, part of the work that my ship did was we would put GPS stations out on the shoreline in the areas that we were working in. We had to have very accurate positions. We were doing survey mapping. So we would have several GPS stations that were all put in on different spots, would talk to the satellites, listen for their position, and then talk to each other and just try to resolve as tightly as possible. So you had some days where there were a lot of people on the ship working, and then there were other days where we put almost everybody off, and they were all working on shore. One of those days that we had everybody on shore, we were up in Alaska, I think just north of the Arctic Circle, and we were working along this really remote stretch of shoreline. It's remote enough and there was little enough there that the portion of it just in front of me as I was looking at my chart was uncharted. So it's like the literal there be dragons here part. It's like I've got a bunch of information and then nothing for the next 5 miles. It was myself and a more senior officer on watch, and you don't usually have time. You have to practice your seamanship, but you don't usually get time on a working ship to just do whatever and try things out. Today we did. It was me, him, and 3 other people left on the ship out of a crew of about 50. And we had this really interesting current that was coming along the shoreline and was making it kind of hard to turn. So we took turns kind of trying out, if I use just one engine and this much rudder, how can I turn into this current? Can I turn out of it? How does the ship behave? It's like a whole other level of nerdy than what we're used to in the IT world, but we were bored. And so it's my turn, and I'm going through all these turns, and as I'm coming through a turn, I'm facing towards land, and I turn the wheel over to come back the other direction, and nothing happens. And you can't actually see all the selectors on this. Actually, I don't know if you can see that very well at all. Might have a different angle than me, but the steering system was set up so we had 2 rudders. They were both connected together. There were 2 separate motors that drove both the rudders at the same time. We could switch between one or the other. Each motor had its own electrical control system, and then as a backup, it had a pneumatic control system. And then the steering stand had compensators in it, and we could bypass the compensator. So basically, if you lost steering in one way, we had a procedure, and we were trained over and over on that procedure. You know, okay, I've lost steering. Let me turn off the automatic follow from the steering stand. So I've cut the electronic brain out of it. Okay, still don't have steering. Let me switch to the other steering pump. Cut the hydraulics out of it. Still don't have steering. I switched through basically all 7 combinations of steering that we had control over from the bridge, and nothing happened. So I'm pointed at a shoreline that I don't know much about. I'm about a half mile away from entering an area of the chart that is blank. Could be rocks, could be sand. I don't want to hit it either way. And I have absolutely 0 steering, except for mechanical systems. Now, I could actually have somebody go all the way to the stern of the ship, and they get a little hand crank, and basically there's a phone back there that's run entirely on sound, and I can tell them what to do, and they have to stand back there and just crank and crank and crank and crank until I tell them to stop, which is what we were getting ready to do. Except the other redundancy that our ship had is I could control the engines independently. So I turned to the other officer and said, hey, we've completely lost steering. I've gone through all the checkouts, called the CO, called the chief engineer. Actually, I called the chief engineer. Got both of them up there because if their careers are going to end, it's common courtesy to let them witness it. From there, actually, while they were coming up, I was able to kind of split our engines a little bit and was able to just turn away and get into safer water at least. Still couldn't really steer very well, but we weren't going to run aground at that point. What was interesting is this turned out to be, we had all these fail-safes and all these backup systems and everything else. It was like quadruple redundancy built into the system. There's one little tiny metal arm from the motors to the control rod, and there's one bolt that holds that arm into place and connects it to the control rods. And it somehow found its way 2 inches up, 1 inch left, and down. That was it. So quadruple redundancy, except for this one little bolt. So essentially all my steering was working, my steering pumps were working, my controls were working, the Too Smart steering stand was working, and it was just kind of flapping about in the wind, or it wasn't actually turning anything. So, lesson here, mentioned redundancy. If something is truly important, whether it is you're doing microservices and this one microservice handles most of your business, if it's a UI path that is very important to getting your users to an end goal that you want them to get to, make sure you and your users can get to it. Make sure if something fails, you and your users can get to it. Make sure there's multiple paths to get to it. If you have something that's kind of the most important thing on your website and there's one way to get it and it's saved in one place, like that close to having a bad day. So I have 5 minutes. I'm going to tell these faster. User mods. That's not how we designed it to work. Rare photo of pre-beard, pre-hair. Moving on from that. We have a lot of things where, we had 2 sister ships. They were engineered by the same people, built in the same shipyard, designed by the same people. From 30 feet back, they look exactly the same. You get on board, you start to notice, like, that's in a different place. That's not quite the same piece of equipment. That's been modified a little bit. Users meet your stuff, and then they figure out how it works best for them. You design it how you think it works for them. The only way for that relationship to be healthy and to continue and to keep them as users is to get to know your users, get to know their needs, build those relationships, and kind of continuously improve. You go really fast through the last one, time back into the lights. F the light police. That would have been better. This is a great story of a guy and his ingenuity. When you think of light switches in your house, You walk in the door, you walk into a room, it's usually like right there on the wall, right? It's like a common place to have the light switches. If you work on a ship and you work the night shift, that is not where you want your light switch, because you want to preserve your night vision. So you want your light switch to be reachable from the bed, so you can keep things on, keep things off. The engineers that built our ships didn't work on ships, so the light switches were by the door. And it, very industrial. All the, not like here, I guess we've got it closed in, but all the pipes are exposed, everything else. We had this guy, he was on leave. We had to let somebody borrow his room, so I had to go in and clean it up. And while I'm in there, I noticed that he's taken a string, has gone from his bed, over the pipes, through a ring that he got from somewhere, down the wall to the light switch, and he had rigged up a pulley system, basically, so that from his bed, he could pull the light, turn them on, pull the string, turn it back off. And it was just like, perfect, Or we could have put the light switch there, but this is great, So it's, it ties in interesting with a story, the last company that I worked for in the US, we had a system that they had had for 15 years and decided to replace it entirely without a whole lot of forethought or planning. And then they start going out to the users after the fact. And they're like, what are you upset about? What are you missing from the old one? Or like, oh, well, we used to be able to do this, this, and this. And it's like, well, we didn't actually design it to be used that way, And this is kind of a thing, I'm kind of actually combining my last 2 points here. Your users are in many ways unique. Industries have different needs, they have different ways of thinking about things, different ways of approaching things. Don't just stick to traditional patterns. They're good patterns, they're traditional patterns for a reason, they usually work, but know your audience, know when something like the light switch being right here is not the right decision for your group. Yes, 1 minute left, okay. Thank you for indulging my nonsense. Your cookies are in your browser. I did want to include, so this. This is an interesting, getting away from UX and kind of thinking about design. This looks like an utter mess. And I don't know how much of the detail you can see from where you're sitting. It's hastily welded together metal frames, it's cables, it's spools for wire and everything else. This is actually an extremely well-oiled, extremely effective way for pulling up 8,000 meters of sub-ocean cable and the buoy attached to it, putting it aside, replacing it with new 8,000 meters of cable and a new buoy that you just refurbished on the other side of the ship in a matter of about 4 or 5 hours. This was a Pacific Ocean project. There's the Tau buoy array, which monitors the El Nino, La Nina, like warm spots in the ocean. And you periodically have to go through, and there's, I think, 8 of them every 10 degrees of longitude all the way across the Pacific. You go out, you pick up the buoy, you disconnect the cable from it. The first 2,000 meters that you pull in, you have to take all these sensors off as it comes in. You're getting kelp and everything off of it as it comes in. And you can't just take 8,000 meters of cable and just plop it down somewhere. You have to pull it into spools. One spool can't hold 8,000 meters of cable, so you pull in the first 1,000 meters, you tie it off, move it to the next spool, and then you replace them back. And this, it took us, I think, I want to say 5 or 6 hours for the first buoy that we did, which was actually in more shallow water. By the time we were on kind of halfway through, we were doing it in like 4 hours. It just extremely efficient. And what always struck me about this photo is it just looks like a mess. It looks like equipment kind of strewn about the place, and it's all placed very deliberately for how it works. So designs don't always have to be pretty. They do always have to work. Take from that what you will. And now I think I'm over time.